Coolant is not just coolant, and the color in your reservoir might be the most expensive lie your eyes ever believed. Walk up to a warm engine after a long drive, and you can smell it. That faintly sweet, syrupy whisper that drifts off the hot block, almost like burnt cotton candy left in the sun. Pop the hood and look at the reservoir. Maybe it glows pink like watered-down strawberry milk. Maybe it shines that radioactive lime green. Maybe it is orange like flat soda, or rust brown like coffee that was forgotten on the stove. Most drivers I have met in 40 years of turning wrenches glance at that tank, see liquid, and walk away calm. They top it off with whatever jug was on sale at the gas station. They think coolant is coolant. That single belief, in my experience, has quietly killed more engines than potholes, bad gas, and lead foot driving combined. Stay with me, because somewhere around the middle of this, I am going to show you the one cap test that takes about 10 seconds and can tell you if your cooling system is already eating itself from the inside, long before the temperature gauge ever twitches. Here is the promise. By the end of this, you will know why the color of your coolant matters, why mixing the wrong two can turn your radiator into a sludge factory, and how to spot the early warning signs before your head gasket sends you a 4-figure invoice. None of this is fancy. It is the kind of thing your grandfather probably knew, and the kind of thing the quick lube kid down the road may not. So pull up a stool. Let me tell you what that little plastic tank is really trying to say. Let us start with the simplest snapshot, because this one sets the table for everything else. Coolant, in plain talk, is a mix of water and a chemical called glycol, plus a small cocktail of additives. The water moves heat, the glycol keeps it from freezing in winter and boiling in summer. The additives, and this is the part almost nobody talks about, are what actually protect the metal inside your engine. Those additives are the bodyguards. They sit between the coolant and the aluminum, the iron, the copper, the rubber seals, the plastic impellers. They form a thin, invisible film that keeps acid from chewing the metal. And here is the part that matters. Different manufacturers use different additive packages. That is generally why coolants come in different colors. The color is a tag, a flag. A little dyed warning that says, this is the chemistry your engine was designed for. When you pour the wrong chemistry in, those bodyguards can fight each other instead of guarding the metal. 30 seconds. That is the whole snapshot. Coolant is not just antifreeze, it is a chemistry kit. And the color is the label on the bottle. Now let me tell you about a fella named Desmond Crowley. Desmond ran a small landscaping crew out of a town called Millbrook for about 11 years, and his daily driver was a 2009 4-cylinder sedan with around 180,000 miles on it. Reliable as a hammer, he treated that car like a co-worker. Oil every 5,000. New tires when the old ones got tired. The works. One August his reservoir got low, and he was rushing to a job, so he stopped at a corner store and grabbed the only jug they had. It was green. His car had been running pink from the factory. He topped it off. Did it a second time 3 months later. By the following spring, the heater started blowing lukewarm air on full blast. Then the temp needle began creeping up on hills. Desmond brought it in, and we pulled the radiator cap. What slid out looked like brown pudding. Not coolant, not even dirty coolant. A gritty, mustard-colored gel that had coated the inside of the radiator and clogged the tiny passages in the heater core. The pink and green had reacted with each other, and with the heat, and the additives had basically curdled. Like milk in hot coffee. We flushed the system 3 times. We replaced the heater core, the thermostat, the water pump, and the radiator. The bill landed near $2,000, and that was friend pricing. Desmond is a careful man. He did one thing wrong. He grabbed the wrong color jug in a hurry. 11 years of perfect maintenance, undone by 90 seconds at a gas station shelf. I tell this story not to scare you, but because almost every coolant disaster I have ever seen starts this exact same way. A jug, a hurry, a color that did not match. Here is the contrast pair, and I want you to picture 2 engines side by side. Engine A belongs to a driver who has used the same factory-specified coolant since the car rolled off the lot. Pop the cap, peek inside, and the fluid looks clean and bright, almost the same color as the day it was poured. The radiator fins inside the neck look smooth, with a thin, even sheen on the metal. Engine B belongs to a driver who has topped off with whatever was cheapest. Could be green one year, orange the next, a splash of universal blue thrown in for good measure. Pop that cap and the smell hits first. Slightly metallic, slightly sour, like an old penny dropped in vinegar. The fluid is murky, the color of weak iced tea, with little flecks suspended in it that catch the light when you tilt the cap. Inside the neck, the metal looks pitted, like the surface of a shallow tide pool. Same brand of car, same mileage. Two totally different futures. Engine A, treated right, may run another 100,000 without a cooling complaint. Engine B is generally on borrowed time, even though the temperature gauge on the dash might still read perfectly normal today. That gauge, by the way, is one of the last things to warn you. By the time it climbs, the damage tends to already be done. The reservoir is the early warning system. Most people just never learn to read it. So why do the colors even exist? This part trips up a lot of folks, so let me slow down. Decades back, almost all coolant was green. It used a chemistry called inorganic additive technology. Think of it as a thick, fast-acting paint that coats the metal quickly, but wears out in about 2 years. Then car makers wanted longer service intervals. They wanted coolant that could last 5 years, or 150,000 miles. So they invented organic acid technology, often dyed orange or pink or red. That stuff works more like a slow-release tablet. It does not coat everything at once. It seeks out the bare metal spots and protects them as needed. Then came hybrid versions that mixed both ideas. Those often show up in yellow, blue, or that turquoise color you see on some Asian imports. Each chemistry was tuned for a specific engine. European blocks tend to want one thing. Japanese blocks tend to want another. American trucks often want something else entirely. The color was the shorthand. The dye was just dye, but it told you the recipe. When the industry tried to simplify things with so-called universal coolants, they helped a little, but they also gave a lot of people permission to stop reading the owner manual. And that, in my experience, is where the real trouble started. Here is the trickier part. 2 different brands can use the exact same color and still be wildly different chemistry under the dye. A green from one company in 1995 was old-style inorganic. A green from another company in 2015 may be a modern long-life formula that just happens to use green dye for marketing. So matching the color is not actually enough. You generally have to match the specification. The little code on the back of the jug, the one that looks like a string of letters and numbers, that is the real fingerprint. The dye is just the wrapper. Treat the spec as the gospel and the color as a hint, and you will be on much firmer ground. Here is item 6, and this one is the climax of the whole video, so listen close. The most expensive mistake I see, over and over, is mixing 2 different coolant chemistries in the same system. When you pour the wrong color on top of the right color, the additives can react. Sometimes they form a gel, like Desmond's pudding. Sometimes they form a fine, sandy grit that wears out the water pump seal from the inside. Sometimes they drop their protection entirely and leave the metal naked, which means electrolysis starts. Electrolysis is when the coolant becomes slightly electrically conductive and starts eating the aluminum like a tiny battery. You can actually measure it. Stick a voltmeter probe in the reservoir and touch the other end to the battery negative. If you read more than about 0.3 of a volt, your coolant has gone bad and is generally chewing on your engine right now. Most drivers never check this. The damage is slow. It is quiet. It does not make a noise. It does not flash a light. And then one day, a pinhole appears in the radiator, or the water pump starts weeping, or the heater core springs a leak inside the dashboard and floods the passenger floor with sticky sweet liquid. By then, the bill is enormous, because the same chemistry that ate one part has been quietly chewing on every other part too. This is the moment I want you to remember. Wrong color in, slow poison out. Not a dramatic explosion, a slow, quiet, expensive bleed. And the wild part is, it almost always traces back to one single jug that someone grabbed in a hurry. That is why I call this the coolant color mistake. Because it does not look like a mistake at the moment you make it. It looks like a kindness. You were topping off a low reservoir. You were trying to be responsible. And the very act of caring with the wrong jug in your hand may be the thing that costs you the engine. Let us talk about that 10-second cap test I promised you in the hook. Because if you take nothing else from this, take this. Wait until your engine is stone cold. I mean parked overnight cold. Never ever open a hot cooling system, because that hot sweet liquid I described earlier can come out under pressure and burn skin in a heartbeat. Cold engine. Slowly twist the reservoir cap off. Now hold it up to the light. First, look at the rubber gasket on the underside. It should be smooth, slightly flexible, and the same color all the way around. If you see white crusty deposits, or brown rusty streaks, or a sticky residue that pulls between your fingers, like old honey, your coolant chemistry has likely gone bad. Second, look at the bottom of the cap where the spring sits. That spring should be clean metal, maybe a little stained, but not buried in green crust or orange flakes. Third, dip a clean white paper towel into the reservoir, just the tip, and pull it back out. The stain on the paper should be a clean, even color that matches what the jug said. If you see streaks of two different colors, or a muddy brown that does not match anything, you have a contamination problem. That whole test takes about 10 seconds and costs nothing. I have personally found dying coolant systems this way on cars, whose owners swore everything was fine because the temperature gauge looked normal. The cap, in my experience, is the most honest part of the whole engine. It cannot lie. It is sitting right where the chemistry meets the metal, and it shows you what is happening in there long before any dashboard light wakes up. Now, I want to address the so-called universal coolants, because this is where a lot of well-meaning drivers get hurt. You have seen the jugs. They are usually labeled as compatible with all makes and models. The label may say it mixes safely with any color. In my experience, that claim deserves a careful read of the fine print. Some universal coolants are genuinely well formulated and may work reasonably well as a top-off in a pinch. Others are basically the chemistry equivalent of mixing every soda from the fountain into one cup. It might look fine. It might even taste okay for a minute. But the long-term result tends to be unpredictable. The real issue is that universal coolants generally cannot match the very specific additive package that your engine was designed for. They are a compromise, sometimes a smart compromise, sometimes a lazy one. The only way to know is to look up what your manufacturer specifies by name and number in the owner manual. If the universal jug lists that exact specification on its label, you are probably in safer territory. If it just says compatible with everything in vague language, I would generally treat it like a backup plan for emergencies only, not a long-term solution. And once you get home, a full flush and refill with the correct factory-specified coolant is the move I would suggest. Think of universal coolant the way you would think of a spare tire. Fine for the drive home, not what you want to ride on for the next 3 years. And here is one more wrinkle on this. Some shops, including some quick lube chains, default to a single universal coolant for every car that rolls in, because it is cheaper to stock one drum than to keep 5 different products on the shelf. If you have ever had your coolant topped off during a routine oil change, and you have no record of what was added, your system may already be a quiet blend of 2 or 3 different chemistries. That is not necessarily a death sentence, but it is worth knowing. Next time you bring the car in, ask. A good shop will tell you exactly what is going in. A shop that shrugs is one I might think twice about. There is another myth I want to clear up. A lot of folks believe that as long as the reservoir is full, the cooling system is healthy. That belief, unfortunately, may be one of the most dangerous in all of car care. The reservoir level only tells you one thing, that there is enough liquid in the system to fill the void. It tells you nothing about whether that liquid is still doing its job. Coolant generally wears out from the inside, just like motor oil. The water and glycol can stay liquid for a very long time, but the additives, the bodyguards, slowly get used up by the heat and the metal contact. After a few years, they basically run out. The fluid still looks like coolant. It still flows. It still keeps things from freezing. But the protection layer is gone. From that moment on, Every mile you drive is generally putting tiny scratches on the inside of your engine that you cannot see and cannot undo. This is why coolant has a service interval, and this is why ignoring that interval, in my view, is one of the quietest forms of self-sabotage in modern car ownership. The fluid is still there. The fluid is just no longer doing what it was hired to do. Like a guard who fell asleep at the gate. The door is still locked, but anybody can walk in. The interval varies by chemistry, but a good general rule of thumb is this. If your owner manual says change at 5 years or 100,000 miles, take that seriously, even if the fluid still looks fine to your eye. Looks are deceiving with coolant. The dye is the most stable part of the recipe. The dye can stay bright and pretty long after the bodyguards have walked off the job. So mileage and time matter more than appearance. Let the calendar tell you when to flush, not your eyes. Let me tell you about the smells. Because your nose is one of the best diagnostic tools you own, and almost no one uses it. Healthy coolant has a faintly sweet smell, almost like a sugary syrup left to dry on a counter. That is normal. That is the glycol. What you do not want to smell, ever, is that sweet smell inside the cabin while you are driving. If you climb into your car on a cold morning, turn on the heat, and the air coming out of the vents has that same sweet syrup smell. Generally with a slight fog on the inside of the windshield that does not. Clear up easily, you may have a heater core leak. The heater core is basically a tiny radiator tucked behind the dashboard, and when it springs a leak, it sends a fine mist of coolant straight into the cabin air. People breathe it without realizing what it is. You also do not want to smell coolant outside the car while idling in a closed garage, because that often means a leak is hitting a hot surface and burning off into the air. And the worst smell of all, in my experience, is a sharp, acrid, burnt sugar smell that hits you when you open the hood right after a hard drive. That can mean coolant has touched the exhaust manifold, which generally means a leak somewhere serious. Trust your nose. It will tell you things long before any sensor will. There is also a visual cue I want you to know about. White steam coming from the tailpipe on a warm engine, especially the kind that has that same faint, sweet smell when you walk behind the car, can mean coolant is leaking into the combustion chamber. That generally points to a head gasket issue, which is one of the most expensive cooling-related failures there is. Likewise, a milky tan film on the underside of the oil filler cap can mean coolant has found its way into the oil. Neither sign means panic. Both mean schedule an appointment soon, and stop putting miles on the engine until someone has had a real look. Here is another item I want to slip in, because it gets asked a lot. What about water? Can you just top off with plain water in a pinch? The honest answer, in my view, is that water is a short-term band-aid, not a fix. Distilled water, the kind sold in a jug at the grocery store, may be acceptable in an emergency if you are stranded with a low reservoir and no coolant in sight. It will keep the engine cool enough to get you to a parts store, generally, especially in mild weather. But two things matter. First, plain water dilutes your additive package. Pour in a quart of water, and you have just watered down the bodyguards by that much. The protection is generally weaker after. Second, never use tap water if you can possibly avoid it. Tap water contains minerals, chlorine, and sometimes a little iron or calcium, depending on where you live. Those minerals can drop out of the water and deposit on the inside of the engine. I have personally pulled radiators that looked like the inside of an old tea kettle, all furred up with white scale, because someone topped off with garden hose water for years. Distilled water is at least clean. It has no minerals to leave behind. But even distilled water is a stopgap. Once you get home, the right move is generally to drain enough of the diluted mix out and bring the system back up to the proper coolant to water ratio. Most factory specifications want roughly half coolant and half water, give or take. Some prefer a slightly stronger mix in very cold climates. The owner manual will tell you. The point is, water can save you on the side of the road. Water is not a long-term member of the team. And one more note on this. If you do top off, with water on the road, generally make a mental note of roughly how much you added. When you get home, tell whoever services the car. That number helps figure out the new dilution and what needs to come out. Information is cheap. Guessing later is expensive. The last full item I want to give you is about the timeline, because this is the part that surprises people the most. The coolant color mistake usually does not show its damage right away. You will not pull into the driveway after pouring the wrong jug and find a puddle the next morning. The bad reaction tends to build slowly. It can take weeks, months, sometimes a year or two, for the gel or the sludge or the electrolysis to do enough damage to cause a visible symptom. That delay is what fools people. They top off with the wrong color, the car drives fine for a season, and they conclude that all those warnings on the internet were nonsense. Then the heater stops working in February. Or the water pump fails on a road trip in July. Or the radiator springs a leak the week before the holidays, and they never connect it back to that one jug a year ago, because the cause and the effect are so far apart in time. This is also why used car shopping is its own little minefield in this department. You may buy a perfectly clean-looking car from a previous owner who topped off with the wrong stuff for years, and inherit a cooling system that is already most of the way through dying. My general rule when I look at a used vehicle is to pop the reservoir cap before I even check the oil. If the cap looks bad, I may walk away from the whole car. Not because cooling system work is impossible to fix, but because that cap is telling me about the previous owner's habits, and habits tend to leave fingerprints on every other system too. The timeline also explains why this topic is so hard to argue with at the gas station. If the wrong jug killed a car the same week, every driver in the country would know to read the label. But the damage moves at the speed of corrosion, not at the speed of a movie scene. A drop of acid on a piece of aluminum does almost nothing in a minute. Give it a year, with heat cycles and pressure cycles every single day, and that same chemistry can carve a pinhole right through a casting that started out as thick as a coin. Engines do not fail in dramatic ways from this. They fail in patient ways. They get a little weaker every week, and the temperature gauge stays right where it always was, until one day there is just not enough metal left to hold pressure. That is the version of the story most drivers never see, because by the time they meet the failure, they meet it as a sudden event. Heater stopped working. Puddle in the driveway. Cloud of steam at a stoplight. The truth is, the failure started a year or two before, in a quiet aisle at a roadside store, with a jug that looked close enough. And if you are watching this and feeling that small sinking feeling, because you remember a time you grabbed the wrong jug, take a breath. The cooling system is one of the most forgiving systems on a modern car, if you act early. A full drain and refill with the correct factory-specified coolant, ideally combined with a few patient distilled water rinses in between, can rescue a system that has been on the wrong chemistry for a while. As long as the damage has not progressed to actual metal loss or leaks, the earlier you catch it, the cheaper it stays. A flush is a fraction of the cost of a radiator. A radiator is a fraction of a water pump and heater core combined. All of those together are a fraction of a head gasket or a full engine. So the curve runs steep in the wrong direction the longer you wait. That, more than anything, is the reason I made this video. To give you a chance to step in early, while $100 fix is still on the table, instead of waiting for a $5,000 emergency. So here is the warning, and then the method, and then a question I want you to sit with. The warning is this: coolant is not interchangeable. The color is not decorative. Mixing the wrong two in a hurry can quietly cost you an engine, and the damage tends to show up months later when you have forgotten what you poured in. The method is what I have come to call the cold cap check. Wait until the engine is fully cold. Open the reservoir slowly. Look at the gasket, the spring, and the stain on a clean white paper towel. If anything looks off color, gritty, gelled, or crusted, treat it as a sign that your cooling system may need a proper inspection, and possibly a full flush with the factory-specified fluid. Match the color the manufacturer specified. Write the spec number on a piece of tape and stick it inside your glove box, so the next time the reservoir runs low, you do not have to guess at a gas station shelf at 10 at night. Read the owner manual once, just the cooling section, and you may save yourself thousands of dollars over the life of the car. Now here is the question I want to leave you with, and I would really like to read your answers in the comments. What color is the coolant in your reservoir right now? Do you actually know what specification your car was designed for? And have you ever topped off with whatever was on the shelf without checking? Be honest. I am not here to shame anyone. Half the cars I work on were topped off the wrong way at some point. The first step in protecting the engine you have is admitting what may already be in there. Tell me your story. Tell me the color, the brand, or the moment you finally learned what your car was supposed to drink. I read every comment. Until next time, keep your engine cool, keep your eyes on that reservoir, and please, before you pour anything in that little plastic tank, take 10 seconds and check the cap. Your engine is generally trying to tell you something. The only question is whether you are listening.